Welcome everyone to Eyes on Books. I'm Mike Holtzman. My co-host Terry Calsal and I have a very interesting show for you today. We'll be discussing Steph Cha's 2019 novel, Your House Will Pay, which was the recipient of both the LA Times Book Award and the California Book Prize. Later, Steph Cha will be joining us through the wonders of Zoom to answer questions about her powerful novel. The story follows two LA families, one Korean and one African American, who are connected by a fictionalized version of a 1991 crime. The true life incident contributed to the chaos and riots resulting from the verdict of the Rodney King trial. The story switches back and forth from the period of the crime to almost 3 decades later and describes the effects it has on both these families.
Well, it was a fictionalized version, but it was based on a true crime. And it really surprised me reading through this book. It's based on systematic racism. And she did a tremendous amount of research and used a tremendous amount of help to plow through all the history involved in this.
It even made it more powerful for me at the end of the book when she describes the actual real-life event, because her book almost mirrored it a lot, and the effect it has on the two communities, the African American community and the Korean community, was very powerful.
And it still is powerful. And it's not just between those two communities. Each community, whether they're Korean, African American, it doesn't matter. Racism does exist. And this book just falls into the whole scheme of life, which is so surprising and so timely.
I guess the communities realize it all along. The book came out right at the time that the George Floyd incident came up, and it made it even more powerful because it was from 30 years ago, but it's mirroring what's going on in today's communities.
Yes, it is. So just a little bit about the book. You have to wonder, there are some main characters and then there are some side characters. And the main characters are basically, and not to give too much away, but the main characters, you don't expect them to do what they did. And because nowadays everyone wants revenge. And the main characters are looked at as, well, come on, go get them. And they don't, which really surprised me with this.
Well, how the underlying lives they lived over that period of time was affected by that one incident, and each thing that happened to them, with it, how their relationships with each other went for those almost 3 decades, were affected by that one incident, and it became very, very powerful.
Okay, so let's talk about that one incident, which included a murder. The murder of a 16-year-old, which did occur. And it occurred in a liquor/grocery store of a 16-year-old female.
Yes, and it was basically, it was understandable that under the pressures of what goes on in those neighborhoods, that the person who murdered the poor girl she overreacted, obviously, but you could almost understand what she went through. I mean, she was guilty of murdering a 16-year-old girl. There was no question about it. But the way that it was dealt with by the communities, both communities, just was brought up a lot of inflamed the whole area.
It did. And the young girl who was African American, the clerk was Korean, and the young girl was also with her brother, who was younger, went into the store to get some milk. And now this is a true story. This story was taken, the book is written from the true story. And she goes into the store to buy some milk, and she has the money in her hand to buy it. But the clerk, who is pregnant at the time, decides that she's there to steal it. And the young girl goes to protect herself and punches the clerk. And the young girl turns her back on her, and the woman shoots her in the back of the head and kills her.
Actually, the young girl's hands were full, so she took the milk, she put it in her backpack, went to pay. The clerk only saw the fact that she was putting this milk in her backpack, assumed she was stealing it, and tried to grab the backpack off her back, and that's what started the fight. But it was the environment of the area where the clerk was so afraid of people coming in and stealing things that she overreacted to this innocent movement that this young girl did, and caused for the murder of this young girl.
And she went to trial, the clerk went to trial, and she was found guilty.
Yes. And they found her guilty, but they kind of said, well, she was guilty, but she's not really a bad person, and she's not going to go out and kill anybody else, so there's no sense putting her in jail. We'll just make her do some community service and pay a little fine, and she won't do it again. And that just enraged the Korean community, which lost the African American community, which lost this young, wonderful little girl, got shot for nothing, and there was no penalty paid for it.
Well, the penalty wound up being that the Korean community businesses were wiped out.
And this isn't just in the book. In 1992, which was after this real incident and after the Rodney King trial, they burnt hundreds and hundreds of businesses in that area because they were inflamed by the way the legal system ignored what was happening to them.
Okay, now, 30 years later, here we are. Because we're in time travel now with this book. So we're 30 years later. The clerk, who has aged, never served a moment of time. She did some community service, but that's all. She changed her identity.
Yeah, and in reality, those years, because now we have cell phones and we have everybody has pictures of what's going on, the problem with the police was more visible, and the communities, this Black Lives Matter thing came out in the world, and everything became that much more exposed and more visible to the public.
Okay, so the family where this young lady, where she belonged, sort of learned to live with their loss. And they passed the story down generation to generation. And everyone in the family knew about it.
As opposed to the family of the Korean woman who perpetrated the crime, they just silenced the whole thing up. Nobody in that family knew about anything afterward. It was never spoken about again.
One of them did.
Yeah. Well, in general, they didn't talk about it.
Okay, but one of them did not. And that's where you find it sort of unbelievable. So that's where the the reader really needs to get into the book and find out and say, what the heck? What?
Yeah, the relationship of the members of the family, the two sisters and the sister and the parents, and it was caused by the one incident and how they dealt with that incident. And we don't want to give too much away, but it becomes a very interesting book because of these relationships on both families.
And how one family could live so out and know everything, and one so cloistered and live a whole separate identity. Anyway, we need to stop this discussion for right now and get ready for our Zoom discussion with the author, Steph, and let her tell us what's going on with it and her opinions. So why don't we do that, Mike?
We look forward to speaking with her.
Okay. Steph, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We just had a beginning discussion about your book, and I have to tell you, we really enjoyed reading it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad.
We have it really. Well, my first question is, how long did it take you to write this book? Because we saw how much research you had to put into it.
It took me from beginning to end of the editing process about 4.5 years. I think the drafting process was closer to a little over 3 years, but it was definitely, it was my fourth book. It's the longest I've spent on a book by a lot.
When you started writing the book, you knew about the Latasha Hollins incident, or you learned about it as you were researching the book?
I learned about it before I started writing the book. It was really kind of learning about it and researching it was the impetus for writing the book. I heard an NPR interview or KPCC interview with this professor, Dr. Brenda Stevenson, who wrote a book about called The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins. And I heard an interview with her on the radio, and I'd been familiar vaguely with the tensions between like the Black and Korean communities in the early 90s. I knew about Rodney King. But I think that was the first time I had heard about the Latasha Harlins Sunjaju case in any detail. And it really hit home with me in a way that, was immediately emotional. And that made me think that I wanted to write about it.
How difficult was it for you to delve into the African American community and get a view from there?
That was the hardest part of writing the book for me, was getting into Sean and his family, getting into Sean's point of view. I had written 3 novels from the point of view of a single character who was a Korean American woman. And when I started writing this book, I had a narrator in mind who was a Korean American woman who became Grace. But as I started thinking about what the book should look like, I realized that I was going to have to occupy the point of view of someone from the victim's family. And that was not an easy thing to do. It's not something that I took lightly. And it probably added, at least a year, maybe longer than that, to the drafting process, because, I just had to edit a lot to get Grace and Sean's points of view to feel equally inhabited. Because, I've been a 27-year-old Korean American woman. That's not a voice that I had trouble with. And I knew, too, that, I wouldn't be scrutinized for mistreating that character. And so, Sean just took a lot longer to figure out and just get comfortable with. And, getting to know his family, that took, that took a lot of effort, and a lot of that was background research, reading about Black Los Angeles, but a lot of it too was just kind of getting comfortable with writing these characters and, writing them as human rather than from like a zoomed out sociological perspective. I think as an author, you need to be able to get in the weeds with your character and closing that distance and making sure that I was able to do that took some time and a lot of just a lot of work, which I was happy to put into it. But that's I guess the long answer to that.
But his aunt was also very pivotal in this.
Mm-hmm.
She was one of, as far as I was concerned, one of the main characters because she sort of held the whole family together. Yeah,
Aunt Sheila was a real linchpin of that side of the story for me. And actually, in initial, when I first started writing the book, I didn't have her as a present day character. I had her in the past, but I had, killed her off, in the intervening years. And it was when she came alive and when she and Sean had, the relationship that they have and kind of the back and forth that they have that a lot of that family made sense to me, having this matriarch and having her kind of goals be kind of a little bit off from Sean's. And she's just a character that I admire a lot. I will say, she was easier to write than Sean because, writing someone from the outside is easier than writing someone from the inside. Because Sean, you have to be on his shoulder, you have to be in his head. I've written characters who are, non-Korean, who are different from me, from the point of view of the narrator before, and that's always been a little bit easier because you don't have to be inside of their head following their thoughts. But yeah, she was pretty important to me to get right.
Did you actually go out and interview people or?
Oh yeah. One of the first pieces that came together in this book for me was a friend of mine came to a reading I did of, this actually started as a short story about two Korean American sisters who find out that their mom has this really heavy secret from the early 90s. And, it was explicitly based on Sunja-do, or it referenced Sunja-do. A friend of mine who's older, he's like Sean's age, like early 40s, early to mid 40s, I guess he's mid 40s now. He was at the reading, and he's a Black man in his 40s who grew up in LA and actually went to high school, the same high school as Latasha Harlins. And he came up to me after the reading and told me this, that he went to high school with her, and just said, if you want to sit down and talk about anything, I'd be happy to. So I ended up buying him drinks several times during the drafting process, and he was one of my first readers. So that was very helpful. And just over the time that I was writing this book, I talked to whoever I could who had lived through that period. A lot of people in LA who've been here for a while, have very strong memories of 1991, 1992. And so a lot of my research was just collecting memories from people.
It's interesting that the release of this book, when you finished it, happened at the time, basically when George Floyd happened, and it made it even more pertinent to everybody who's reading it because it's going on in our life today.
Yeah, it came out in October 2019, so it was before. I think it was 8 months before George Floyd's murder. I think the summer of 2020, I got a number of emails and I had people talking about my book in the context of George Floyd and the protests that happened afterwards, and just saying that my book was very timely. And when I started writing this book in 2014, I felt like it was also very timely. It was after Mike Brown's death and the unrest in Ferguson, and it kind of and I was writing it while the Black Lives Matter movement was kind of gaining traction and becoming what it is today. and so and you know, in 1992, 1991, it would have been very timely. I just think that this conversation around racial justice, social justice, the role of police in our society, you know, this is all ongoing. You know, the tensions between, you know, immigrant groups and Black Americans in, you know, in cities that where they are pitted against each other. You know, that I think that is all stuff that doesn't really fall out, at least not of my mind. But yeah, I mean, it certainly coincided with something that the general population was talking about a lot in 2020.
I have to tell you that it kept me riveted, the book, and what surprised me, and I can't say what the ending was because I want the readers to read the book, but the ending really surprised me. I thought it was going to have a totally different end to what was going on. But I also thought that at any point in time, Grace, who was the daughter from the Korean family, could turn the tables on the African American family. And it left me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, the whole book deals pretty heavily with balances of power, you know, and Grace is in a situation where, like, she has the power for a lot of the book, and that's something that I think everyone is aware of, and I think she's aware of it too. You know, I think she feels both guilty and aggrieved at the same time. You know, and that's something that that kind of shifting balance of power and that feeling of, you know, who's been wronged. That's something that you know, I think that Americans are constantly kind of battling over, like, who's the wronged party here. That's a constant conversation. You know, do we weigh this incident more heavily than this one? How do we measure this in the context of history? And yeah, in this book, that's something that she is dealing with on the, you know, both in the back of her mind and very much on the surface, just in what she does.
Okay, so I interpreted this correctly then.
Yeah, I mean, power dynamics. You know, I think that is that is something that you know, I always am tracking when I'm writing, because I think they're really important, and they kind of inform how we behave around each other.
Okay, so I want the readers to read this book, and then I want them to get back with us.
Are you working on a new book?
I'm not working on a new book right now. I have been working on TV stuff for the last year and a half, and I'm actually having another baby, and very shortly. So, but I will be once this second child is, you know, a little bit more, not self-sufficient, but you know, not quite newborn.
Any thoughts of making this book a movie? Would be a great movie.
We are in the process of making a limited TV series.
Oh.
But you know how these things go. We'll see.
Right. Yeah.
Are you retaining the rights to it?
No. It's with a production company.
Okay.
I'm involved, but yeah.
All right. Well, what else do we need to know about you?
You know, a lot of it's in the work. What else do you want to know?
Oh, something fun and wonderful.
We know about your puppies, and we know about your baby. We've been researching you.
Yeah, well, those are a big part of my life. I have a 2.5-year-old son and another son who will be joining us any week now, and I have 2 basset hounds. We're also boys. I'm surrounded by.
Oh, wow.
I'm surrounded by sons.
You have done quite a few YouTubes as well. I think we've watched all of them.
Look, I guess, recorded events and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what, we have absolutely loved your book, and we are strongly recommending it to the folks who are watching this show.
Well, thank you so much.
And
Thank you very much for joining us.
yes, and we are being given the sign that we must conclude this interview because we are out of time.
Okay.
But
Well, thank you so much for reading, and I hope people who are watching, find something meaningful in this book. I really
I'm
appreciate
sure
it.
they will. I am absolutely sure they will, and I hope they really get something meaningful from it, because I know I did.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
We thank you for tuning in to Eyes on Books. And if you have any books that you think might make an interesting discussion, or authors who are good speakers, we'd love to hear your suggestions. Contact us at eyesonbooks@yahoo.com, and keep watching